There's a trope I've been obsessed with from the first moment I witnessed it, the Ancient Keeper. An eternal being which exists alone with a wealth of knowledge, allowing the worthy to become enlightened and striking down those otherwise. My first exposure, and maybe yours too, was in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Book 2's 10th episode is The Library, where Aang, Katara, Sokka, and Toph come across a professor of anthropology searching for a vast library in the middle of the desert, supposedly more complete than any other. Despite years of near-death treks into this harsh space, he's been unable to find it, and it becomes clear why with a bird's-eye view, as the structure is mostly buried under the sand. This doesn't stop a gang of benders, though, as they clamber in and down the visible tower to find an immensely vast space and its keeper. While originally intended to assist humanity, their relationship with the species has soured over time and only worsens when it's once again proved that we abuse knowledge for conflict. What they're looking for amongst all of this knowledge is a combat advantage over the Fire Nation. In response, the spirit begins totally sinking the library so no mortal could ever enter it again, and while our main cast does escape, the professor refuses, saying that he could spend an eternity in here. In all likelihood, either the spirit or the pouring sound will kill him. Both of these things are known. And yet, having access to all of humanity's knowledge is so intoxicating that even just another hour, another few minutes with it, is worth his whole life. To be honest, I remember very little about Avatar. I watched it quite young, so I only recall Sokka's girlfriend turning into the moon and the That's Rough buddy that followed, or the Secret of the Fire Nation episodes that we had TiVo'd for some reason. Yeah, who remembers TiVo? But across all of these years, I've never forgotten the library because of its sense of joyous claustrophobia. To get what you always wanted, but because it's your only option. Trapped with your desires. Two conscious beings decide on this, locking themselves in with nothing but knowledge until the end of their times. Could I do this? Try to forget all the things I want to do before I die? Or would this just be a waste of my precious time? Would I even still be me if I did, having replaced choice with the idea of others? Where would the space for me be in this endless knowledge? Maybe I would go mad and rip something off the shelf and tear it in half, and then I would do it again and again and again forever. But not really. Eventually, I would be left with just one page, and since no one calls a page a book, I couldn't have the book anymore. It's this principle which brought about atomism in the ancient world, a natural philosophy positing that everything in the world is crafted from fundamental, indivisible components. If a book is defined as a series of pages, then one page is the most fundamental unit. Of course, we can physically divide it further. Even if not a book, it's still real. All that's happening is it's left our agreed upon definition of what this series of parts is called. But the principle remains the same even when applied to non-human constructs. I can only cut a piece of paper in half so many times before any tools would fail to be precise enough to do it again. Consider a completely mathematical argument that the Greeks had. Some believed that all objects were composed of a series of infinitely divisible planes. Like the pages of a book, they can appear whole together, but are actually able to be split again and again forever. However, this leads to a contradiction, because if that's so, and I take this and whoa, wasn't that amazing? Since infinite division means infinite positions in space, I just moved an object through infinite many positions in a finite amount of time. Clearly that can't be the case. Following their logic, that must mean there's a smallest unit of thing. While there was debate about what these smallest parts were, ancient atomism laid the framework for their existence. Of course, in the modern age, this is commonly accepted as the pattern of the universe. Through the different organizations of the same fundamental components like protons, neutrons, and electrons, you get every single element on the periodic table. Everything you witness, all of this variety, could be broken down into the same exact components and reshaped into anything else. And whether we notice it or not, we often mimic nature's patterns in our creations. So language follows a pattern similar to this. It's of the same form, combination of base components to a greater effect. I mean, right now, I'm communicating to you through an essay, which is composed of paragraphs, which is composed of sentences, of words, letters, and, well, that's it. Through those 26 letters, as well as a few punctuational characters, we end up with 171,476 currently recognized and in-use words, according to the Oxford English Dictionary. Of course, this requires many social aspects, as we have to agree upon and record what the arrangement of those characters mean, i.e. the dictionary, but in the universe of written communication, you cannot break anything down to a lesser level than the alphabet. Through the combination of meaningless characters, we get love letters and poetry and research papers and Avatar and, well, kind of meaning itself. This is what led to the infinite monkey theorem, that a monkey at a typewriter could eventually, and by the chance of entirely random keys, write Hamlet. Hamlet is quite large though, so let's consider Hamlet instead. The proper noun, not the work it refers to. Adapting Wikipedia's example, if we sit the monkey down at a typewriter with 50 keys, and it has an equal chance of pressing each one, the odds it types H to start would be 1 in 50. Since each keystroke is an independent event, that is, their order has no bearing on their chance, the odds of A being pressed next are the same, 1 in 50. To get the odds of both in order, these are just multiplied like this. The process repeats 6 times for 6 letters, and you end up with 1 divided by 50 to the 6th, which is 1 in 15,625,000,000, and then, all the appropriate zeros. Put a different way, if every single person on Earth was typing 6 letters randomly, you would only have a 50% chance of getting the word Hamlet. But that's with just one attempt. It could be infinite people, or an infinite being, or infinite time, so let's consider the odds of not writing Hamlet. For one trial, this is 1 minus our previous result, which is 0.999999999. You get the idea. But applying the same process of independent events, you multiply this result by itself like this, 1 minus 1 over 50 to the n, where n is the number of attempts. At 1 million trials, the odds of it not occurring are still almost 1. But at 10 billion trials, the odds are just over 1/2, and at 100 billion trials, the odds are essentially 0. It is guaranteed to happen with infinite time. This is the law of truly large numbers. Any bounded set of independent events can be exhausted as long as you have infinite trials. Take the library episode of Avatar again. Aang and Sokka are just trying to use the planetarium to find the date of the next solar eclipse, a day where the Fire Nation would have no power. It is possible to calculate this. We have equations for the motions of the planetary bodies, but they lack the knowledge and skill to do this. So they just change the date forward by 1 over and over again, and by sheer chance, find that the next one is a few months later. You don't need knowledge so long as you have a large enough trial size. It's what we'd call brute forcing the solution, and depending on the context, this is often the quickest, or at least the simplest route to the solution. I mean, what gets them out of there quicker after all? Finding a book on astronomy and learning it, or pulling a lever 100 times or so? And what gives them a guarantee? A calculation they could get wrong through wrong information or their own lack of skill, but a planetarium that someone smart made, well, they know that it's right. There's a certainty and immediacy to exhaustive completion that, well, any human finds appealing. Working from that feeling, what if we combine the 2 parts of this video so far? We want a vast library so that we can find beneficial knowledge we know is good, and a bounded series of independent events, such as a limited set of characters, can be exhausted through enough trials. So what if we generated an endless library? This is the concept of the universal library, developed by many but made most famous by Jorge Luis Borges in the Library of Babel. The exact details of the setting aren't known, but we follow the account of a librarian, humans who exist in what some call the library, others call the universe. Through dim lighting and stale air, they endlessly search the conjoined hexagons, with 2 open ends for travel, in between which sit an alcove for sleeping upright and a small closet for human necessities. On each of the 4 closed ends is one bookcase, containing 5 shelves holding 30 volumes, made of 410 pages in 40 lines of 80 characters each. Now, the library is sometimes called the universe because it is essentially infinite. It contains every possible combination of those 25 characters, from a volume which is simply A, followed by 1,311,999 spaces, to one which is Z that same number of times and everything in between. If something is longer than that many characters, that's fine, because it can simply be stretched across multiple volumes. It's not about every book ever after all, but just every possible facet of this written language. Through sheer chance alone, the shelves will contain everything that was, is being, or could be written. A biography of Harry Truman, never revealed surveillance documents relating to the Red Scare, the exact transcript of how the announcers called the 1955 Brooklyn Dodgers defeat of the Yankees, a scientific description of how thalidomide caused more than 10,000 birth defects in the 50s and 60s, an account of the Berlin Wall coming down from one of the people who was at the scene, as well as every other occurrence in Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire, and every cover of it ever, and the lyrics to all of them. But what makes the story compelling is that none of this is initially known to the mortal librarians. They didn't all pop into existence here and know right away what their world was composed of, but much like us, had to trial and error their way from ignorance to understanding. Over centuries, they find hints at the base nature. 2 identical lines of a volume back to back, one of the letters MCV perversely repeated from the first line to the last, the phrase, "O time, thy pyramids," and from logical deduction slowly prove the library must contain everything. They begin randomness, aimless searching in the dark, and with careful deliberation and centuries of debate end up at a proof of infinite knowledge. Every great book, every solution to every problem, the meaning of the library and all of their lives alike, it's all here, just waiting to be found, just like the precious phrases they built this proof upon. The narrator recounts how the announcement of this led to a wave of joy sweeping throughout the library, because each one could now find anything they wished for, selfishly or not. In short, the world already contained its own perfection. Anything was possible. But as the narrator also says, that unbridled hopefulness was succeeded, naturally enough, by a similarly disproportionate desperation. The certainty that some bookshelf and some hexagon contained precious books, yet that those precious books were forever out of reach, was almost unbearable. The problem is that however noble we think discovery is, it's actually kind of a terrible process to engage so strictly in. Sure, with one lever, with a few options, it's not so bad, but with so much to hand, how does one actually find any of those answers in the overwhelming flood of nonsense? Think of it like this. If the odds of only a specific 6-letter word in a 25-character system are 17,812,500,000, and there are roughly 22,000 6-letter words in the English language, then they would have to look through around 350 million 6-letter strings before they found even one. Now, they can consider each next character as the beginning of the next string, since what precedes or follows doesn't change the word in between. So they'd only have to look through 350 million letters, not 6-chunk strings. But that's still this crypt so far about 27,000 times, or about 110,000 pages. And that's just to find any 6-letter word. Finding a specific one is 22,000 times harder, and each additional character is another 25 times harder. Finding a specific word, let alone a book, would take longer than the universe has existed. And things don't get better, because even if you did beat the odds and find the right thing, how do you know it's right? Since the library contains everything, it doesn't just have the right answer to every question or the true meaning of life, it also contains every wrong answer to every question and every false meaning of life. The meaning of life is searching the library and 42 and ham sandwich and Say a librarian picks up a volume, and the last sentence is, "The meaning of life is found in Volume 3 of Shelf 3 of Hexagon 22 of Circuit 1173. It's some 70 years of walking away, but each and every day they wake up and do nothing but go straight towards this location, reaching it after a lifetime of toil, opening the listed volume, and finding nothing but nonsense because there are an infinite number of books listing an infinite number of others as containing this even though they don't." This could be made easier with some sort of catalog, and it wouldn't even need to be made by the librarians because the library itself would have already made it. Except once again, there is one with every correct location and an infinite number with wrong locations. So they would have to first find it, and then go to every single location and validate that it is correct for each one. And if you have to do that anyway, why not just skip the first step of finding it? They could just decide to begin an index at any point and cut out half the time it takes. The same goes for the meaning of life and the library. If you have to find the proof and the proof of the proof and the proof of the proof of the proof and so on, why not just create the knowledge yourself? Generating an answer by generating everything is quite literally just creating an infinite extra amount of steps tacked onto the front. This exercise explains what knowledge truly is. It isn't knowing something, it is knowing why something is. For example, the planetarium. If one brute forces their way to a solution, they know one thing: the date of the next eclipse. The library sinks, and that's all that can ever be known. But if one instead grabs a book which explains how orbits work and then provides them with the calculations, they know when every solar eclipse ever has occurred and will occur, even if that book is lost, because they can write down the knowledge which is within them to recreate it. They're not all written down exactly, but the possibility of each is contained within just that equation. It's pretty simple. Why would you need the answer to everything, a volume so large it's impractical, when you could just create the answer to anything? A volume that exists within a single person, carried without even holding anything. There is a mathematical proof of this from Universal Library, an article by Willard von Orman Quine. The main issue with the Library of Babel is its size, correct? That's what makes us beyond us, because if we could travel at light speed or live forever, it would be much more useful. To fix the concept, then, we need to reduce the physical scale. So take the number of volumes from Borges' concept, which is 80 to the 500,000th power, accepting that continuity between volumes is required for the endless nature. So what are the factors increasing that number? Well, most notably is the amount of characters. In reality, they are not the smallest unit of reality, because you can communicate complicated concepts in fewer characters, for example, Morse code. It takes more of the same characters to do so, but through only 3, dot, dash, and space, the same exact message could be passed as with our alphabet. This is because 0 and 1 are the actual fundamental units of communication. All you need is the existence of contrast, and through that you can develop a system to say anything so long as you agree upon the meaning of the organization of that contrast. And so, Quine suggests a simplified Morse code, where the space is removed, 2 dots equate to a space, and no character is allowed to be defined with 2 dots in a row. It would be cumbersome to read, but it would be entirely possible. And even though the thought content of each volume is lesser, that is, with longer characters it contains less meaning, continuity between volumes means none is actually lost from the total. Now this takes the number down to 2 to the 500,000th, a reduction of 40 times. But that's still quite large, right? So what if we played to the combinatory aspect, given that's what allowed for our initial reduction? Say we change the size of the volume itself to be only 17 characters. That is a simple 2-inch strip. Every possible combination then would only be 2 to the 17th, or 131,072 strips in total. Sure, none of them in themselves contain Hamlet, but we already made the concession that combination is allowed. And since it is an exhaustive series of strings, you can still find the exact ones needed and place them in the exact order of Hamlet, so long as we accept maybe having to reuse a few. There is always the next strip which continues or completes the work. And we've taken infinity from 80 to the 500,000th books to just 131,000 strips. Of course, this leads to only one conclusion. Why stop at strips, which are still quite specific strings and require effort to find what one knows to say next, when we could just have two small squares, one with a dot and one with a dash, which could be combined in any order to create any combination. It turns out, the exhaustive generation was never actually needed. The total is already contained in the existence of the characters. This might seem silly, but consider this. This entire video, on this entire website, on every device which is playing it, is doing so through a massive combination of just two states in series, on and off. Computing itself is the proof. As Quine notes, it is a letdown befitting the Wizard of Oz, but it has been a boom to computers. This channel is made possible and kept sponsorless by our channel members and patrons. If you found insight from it or other videos, consider supporting for as low as $3 a month, or for free by adding a like, a hype within 7 days of publishing, sharing with someone who'd enjoy, or the best, leaving your thoughts in a comment. Relevant links are pinned down there as well. Knowing this, why do they search at all instead of creating? Based on the emergence of different cultures, of crusades against nonsense books, of the fact they can use these inherent characters for themselves, they show the potential to make much more than they'll ever find. They should know this lesson. So why don't they? Why are they searching and conflicting about the meaning of nonsense volumes? Why are they spending centuries determining that those two repeating lines are a, quote, Samoyed Lithuanian dialect of Guarani with inflections from classical Arabic, which is so blatantly a string of nonsense designed to force another string of nonsense into an existing framework? They're clinging so unhealthily to discovery, cutting books into their letters and tossing them in dice cups, imitating the random generation with their own will instead of just arranging them as they see fit. What is the point? So many methods of creation are right there. But that's kind of the issue in itself. The library has perfection via totality, and so their surroundings, their reference to judge themselves against, is perfection in the possibility of every great thing to ever exist. And this is what they do with that context, what they, as flawed beings, create. Thousands of greedy individuals abandon their sweet native hexagons and rush downstairs, upstairs, spurred by the vain desire to find their vindication. These pilgrims squabbled in the narrow corridors, murmured dark imprecations, strangled one another on the divine staircases, threw deceiving volumes down ventilation shafts, were themselves hurled to their death by men of distant regions. Others went insane. The result is chaos and disorder, which to some feels like an affront to the beautiful, organized nature of the library, to God. Continuing from all gods are failed gods, it's time for another round of Viral doesn't believe in God, but finds arguing for one fascinating. Today it's based on the narrator's belief, as they state, in order to grasp the distance that separates the human and the divine, one has only to compare these crude trembling symbols, which my fallible hand scrawls on the cover of a book, with the organic letters neat inside, delicate, deep black, and inimitably symmetrical. Yes, the librarians have adopted the system of language found in the library, and as the narrator proves by writing 10,000 times more than they've ever discovered, use it to say much more meaningful things than the library makes available to human lives. But that isn't inherently a point for creation, as this is always an act of arrangement and imitation at the root. This system is not one they've invented themselves, but rather discovered. This is inherent to communication. We didn't invent contrast, it already existed around us in light and dark, life and death. We simply adapted it for our purposes the first time a creature made a sound to refer to something. That thing was the sound, and all else was silence. Just as us, the librarians lack the ability to create true characters, contrast, the base unit of the world, and instead only have the ability to imperfectly copy them, never making the inherent symbol exactly, but with minuscule imperfections, and never the same imperfections twice. And the order they place them in, it will, no matter what, have already existed somewhere in the library before they could write it. The narrator technically could have found this work instead. So, did they even create it? If it's even possible by chance, instead of ever experiencing life, they could have picked up books which describe to them exactly how they would have lived in the exact right language to make them feel it, and from reading that come to the same conclusion from nothing outside of the volumes on the shelves. Whether they feel to be a product of that which already exists or not, since everything does already exist, all they can do is copy in pre-described action. So, if they can't create, what did? What is behind the base units which can be used to do so much despite being so simple? And the arrangement of the units, it is something, isn't it? There's so much finesse behind them at a grand scale that they're all placed into the same structure again and again and again and again. While the individual sections a librarian could see may be nonsense, from a universal perspective, it is simply a total collection neatly arranged. Especially considering that the exhaustive nature is a pattern rather than true randomness. How was that bound set? How did this world bias itself against true randomness, where the repetition of volumes would be commonplace? It's like there's a will behind it all, and only one. Because if there were more than one, why would that pattern be so consistent and contain such a small amount of characters? There seems to be no disharmony among the system to infer some sort of disagreement or change or even doubt. From all of that, for this world, a god is actually quite logical. And if the library is something born from one will, then no matter how far beyond human observation it may be, they must assume one meaning to correspond to that one will which they can never understand through mortal logic. Infinity escapes the finite. So if they want to grasp the supposed truth, the only real meaning, the only option is to find it, for they inherently cannot create it, else they would have created their own units. This may be why the narrator, and others like them, pursue a non-interpretive explanation. They are flawed, biased creatures, evident in the past crusades held to destroy books, and how long it took them to grasp the nature of this reality, and how they fight and argue and even murder. Sure, they can try and learn something, but what if their limited perspective means the pattern they found doesn't hold true everywhere? They could spend an entire lifetime working from a flawed principle and amount to nothing. And even if they do create something, what is it worth? A single volume which describes the heavens has value, but is it the same as a single volume which describes everything? What we can make will always be limited to human potential, while what we can find will always be as great as the world itself. Then, even if they're right in their creation, with so many ways of living, how would they actually convince others that they are? Would anyone else listen? Would the cultures all come together or only further fracture? The only thing in common between them all is the books, and so that's going to be the only thing they all inherently believe. Finding eliminates the need to convince which creation is always limited by. And this is a logical proof, negative definition. Normally we define things positively, as in, well, say this is a book, which is a series of pages containing lines of letters in a binding. Those qualities come together to say what the object is. But we could also say this is a book, which is not a bookshelf, and not a light bulb, and not a human, and not everything else, which eliminates every other non-quality. Because saying it is not a light bulb excludes from it the sum of what defines a light bulb. If a book is not one, then it does not light up, it is not metal and glass, and so on. Eventually, if you exhaust everything it isn't, then you inherently get what it is. And one doesn't need to list every object, just enough objects to eliminate every non-quality. Both ways rely on subjective definitions, but one imparts more information through association. One means finding everything else to be certain of one thing, instead of being certain of one thing but having to find all else. This is akin to the library containing one true definition, along with every false definition. Yes, it makes finding it a pain, but it also imparts total certainty. There are literally no options left by the time it is defined. To them, the torture of finding is worth the possibility of true and total knowledge. It is the same as the argument for God. Infinity is God is certainty. And to cap off the allure, finding is easier than creating. This is because finding entails what one already expects the result of. If a librarian says, "I am trying to find Hamlet," then in their mind must exactly be what Hamlet is, from which it becomes infinitely easy to see what isn't. If they open a volume and see Act 1, Scene 1, Isilnor, a platform before the castle, and so on, they keep going. Whereas if they see literally anything else, they stop. Yeah, the chances of that happening are exceedingly low, but that is precisely what makes it so easy on the mind, if not the body. They hardly even need to be conscious in order to recognize such a specific string. And on this large scale, that makes the entire search quite easy, doesn't it? Because the odds of any coherent string are so minimal, anything which is substantial will just leap off the page at them. The greatest librarians ever are remembered for little more than turning over the pages of a specific volume by chance. All one need do to escape the second death is look. But if one tries to create, it is the opposite. In their mind is not a pre-existing concept which can be almost unconsciously seen, but nothing more than the intent to make what is specifically not on the pages. Inherently, they must consider each line, each letter. There is no easy discarding, there is no pattern to follow because the pattern emerges from their will. To create or interpret one of these volumes would require an entire lifetime spent in a single spot with a single book in total effort. And all just to reach something which is meaningful only to them and already exists, in contrast to finding something which is meaningful to everyone. In contrast to the opportunity of finding, as some describe, the total book, one which provides the meaning of the library, a proof for it, and a disproof of all the possible disproofs, thus making them all-knowing, making them God. As we've discussed before, the possibility of becoming infinite justifies all things, and so no matter how unlikely, it must be what they believe. At the cost of their will, they get a chance of becoming God. This is the deadly combination of a being which is limited, but which can comprehend the unlimited. We are at all times aware of our own limitations, that to have the ability to interpret at all entails imperfection since we are unaware of some objective truth, that one day we will cease to exist. And yet within our minds, with the aid of no tools, exists the logic to consider how our language could be extended into infinite space, as well as every consequence of doing so as if some hints of the Creator remains. Inside we hold the logic of an infinity, while outside we are undeniably finite, abstract desires for a concrete form. This contradiction drives us mad, that our existence can never live up to its own logic. And so, like the narrator, in youthful energy we set out to find rather than create, because we want what is certain. We want the status of a god to bring our mind and body into match. We don't want to waste this limited time on being wrong, being forgotten, and by trying and failing. And so, even if the chances of finding it are low, at least it implies truth exists, which our act of creation can never do. Rushing through the library, hexagon to hexagon, climbing the shelves, tossing the volumes, flipping the pages, an unlimited wealth of interpretation passes over unconscious eyes, existing only for truth, discarding all else. Year on year, breaking down as the equation grows worse. The number of trials we have decreases again and again and again, lowering not just linearly, but exponentially as our ability, mentally and physically, decreases, those already slim odds becoming a smaller and smaller percentage of the whole. Isn't that what the midlife crisis is? The inflection point where 50 slips to 49 and a binary look says, "No, you won't." Lowering and lowering until with less than some 1% of their life left, one admits, "It is in ventures such as these that I have squandered and spent my years." By accepting a state with one infinitely important truth, they damn themselves to be surrounded by unimportant falsehoods. There can only be one God after all. Infinity co-opts our logic, as if designed specifically to weigh our natural calculations and to destroy us with them. But it doesn't have to. I think it's only when we attempt to make it real that it must, and the librarians never had a choice. They were always bound to discover the nature of the library and fall into despair since infinity was real and present for them. But we find a different idea in The Universal Library by Kurd Lasswitz. Now, this is a work which is actually misrepresented by Borges in The Total Library, an essay he wrote examining the history of the concept. He says that Lasswitz was in favor of creating a universal library, a claim which has been repeated everywhere, even though if you actually read the work, you'll see that's not the case it's making at all. This misinterpretation was likely helped along by absolutely terrible translations of his story, one of which is even hosted by the Library of Babel website. It's a translation which entirely cut out the emotions of the, albeit somewhat flat but still important characters. So in the sources for this video, always in the pinned comment, there will be a proper translation with a further explanation of this whole debacle. Now, the story is short and simple. Burkle is a magazine editor on vacation visiting Walhausen, a math professor and his family. The former trying to coax the latter into submitting an article. However, the professor continues to refuse as so much superfluous work is already contributed. His wife wonders how it's possible to publish anything new at all, given how much has already been written anyway. But Burkle does speak to the difficulty of the work, saying that since people disagree on what superfluous means, and as such the work themselves mean, the job is actually very tough. Each piece needs a dedicated eye to determine if it should be published or not. As he says, the question is only what, out of everything, is superfluous. Authors and readers have very different opinions on the matter, and whatever critics deem superfluous is precisely what reaches the likes of us. I'm glad, he said, rubbing his hands together with pleasure, that my stand-in at work will have to sweat it out for these 3 more weeks. This is what leads Walhausen to draw up the concept of a universal library, saying that you could just generate each work through exhaustively combining the characters, exactly as we've shown before. Just the same as well, everyone at first finds the idea very appealing. His wife could have access to all the work she loves in one place, his niece could find the letters she wrote and then lost, as well as having her speeches for class written for her exactly as she would have done so, and Burkle would have everything he would ever need to publish complete already. As discussion progresses, however, they sour on the idea, for many of the reasons that we've already shown. The wife sees that she could never actually find the work she loves, the niece that her letters would be predetermined and attributed to everyone who ever existed alike, and Burkle that he actually would have an infinite amount of work to do in sorting through the meaningless works. Not much that's new there. But this story gets to what's core to all of these things, the individual. And this gets to the main point that every piece we've discussed was really making. The more you generate, the more you revoke human will. If everything is already written, then what was the point of you living life as you did, of the experiences which inspired you to make something? If there's a volume out there with the same thing in everyone's name, where is the proof of skill? Where is the pride in accomplishment? If you have every work ever, how do you select any to truly love? If you remove the perspective of others in total generation and make one editor the arbiter of choice, how are impactful choices made through the nonsense to begin with? The important part isn't to try and make infinity real, but rather just the idea that we could. That is the purpose of infinity. To exist only inside of us and to never leave our bounds. As Walhausen puts it, the number of volumes in their system is 10 to the 2 million. They calculated this, they know it. They could draw out 1,000 equations which equal such a number, and yet he knows that it will always escape human experience. Every way to try and represent this number in human terms involves taking grains of sand and piling them across billions of years, stacking paper to the moon for longer than life itself has existed, things that give amazement, but which we have no actual sense for other than so much larger than us. Our logic goes beyond what we can experience, but that's good. As Burkle says, the ability to logically determine such a thing gives us faith in the truth that answers do exist somewhere, and so our efforts can build towards a defined point. And as Wallhausen finishes, that means we must apply it to our situations so that we don't get lost in it and the good it brings. It's there to show us truth, but at the same time make clear that truth is forever beyond the reach of the individual. This means we shouldn't be the monkey at the typewriter. We should be more directed in our efforts because there is a point, a meaning of life, a God, if you will, but also that even if we were, so long as we maintain the trials, so long as we as a species never stop, one day truth is guaranteed. Infinity gives us the reason to do and also the example of what not to do in the same breath. We need not search through the universal library for the volume we require, but rather create it ourselves in constant, serious, honest work. This is true even in the grit of the Library of Babel, which speaks to why we're so obsessed with infinity. Despite being able to drive us mad, it's also what makes the inherent horror of life individually bearable. Consider this. If a librarian sets out to find the total book, spends all their years doing so and never even comes close, would they die in despair or hope? For our narrator who did just that, the answer is actually hope. Despite those years described as wasted, they still believe that there is such a total book on some shelf in the universe. I pray to the unknown gods that some man, even a single man, tens of centuries ago, has pursued and read that book. If the horror and wisdom and joy of such a reading are not to be my own, then let them be for others. Let heaven exist, though my own place be in hell. Let me be tortured and battered and annihilated, but let there be one instant, one creature, wherein thy enormous library may find its justification. It's because their failure doesn't mean what they believe in is false, simply that due to unbeatable odds they couldn't find it. How does one librarian compete against infinity, after all? It crushes them, but it allows them to explain that crush in any desired way. For example, the librarians don't just chase the index of everything, but also the crimson hexagon where the books are smaller, omnipotent, illustrated, and magical. Or the round room, which is just one continuous book around the walls. Or some even believe in the lack of meaning at all in one so-called semi-barbarous zone. They debate about whether it is actually endless or not, or if the books hold some pattern larger than us, all sorts of things. They all witness the same surroundings, but because infinity, something beyond us, is in play, the reasons for those things they witness can never be found but only believed in. And there it is. The point is that such important things are impossible to know, because that means they get to be whatever allows the individual to live. They can choose to believe anything to justify their existence, with no threat to their belief ever able to emerge, since the proof, the disproof, and entire endless chain exists somewhere in unfindable infinity. We cannot bend reality itself to our whims. The base parts are the base parts, and we merely combine them. It is limited, and through that it is harsh. Conflict is certain, and death is the end we all share. Pain and anxiety are what drive action, and no creature will ever be totally satisfied with its life, since its life will always be more limited than the options it can dream of. One cannot be as great as that which created it. Changing the world escapes us. But the reason for the world and all of its aspects rests within our hands exactly because it can never be revealed to a limited being. We get to say why the base parts are, even though we are stuck combining them. We debate about infinity and meaning because we know there is no answer, and so ours is infinitely valid with regards to one life. The essence of reality becomes whatever allows us to move forward despite the horror, whether that's the absurd or heaven or anything in between. Infinity is actually what makes finite existence mentally palatable. Logic which expands our minds beyond our forms isn't torture, it's the one thing holding intelligent life itself together. And that's the video. I don't think it will do well, but it is one of my favorites just because it's indicative of why I love doing this, which is looking at what could almost be a common statement. Infinity justifies all. It's larger than all things, and so everything in service of it is justified. In finding the logic behind that, the why, digging into the math or how humans process it or the stories that inspired it. Not just saying the thing, but saying why the thing is. It's something I think I've gotten good at. It's something I don't know if I see all the time and that I'm proud of, and that's probably why this video won't do well, but I think I do it for a reason. I think it's important. I think it's me, and so this one is going to be one of my favorites. Tried to play with the visuals a bit, don't know how it worked, but leave some feedback on that below, and just on the video in general. The best part of this, full disclosure, the part that also helps it do better is seeing all the comments on it, getting to actually go down in there and discuss with you all. I'm trying to even go into the replies more and like get chains going in there, because that is the best part, like seeing what other people think and the criticisms and how I can get better at it. Without that, it's just me yelling at a wall. So actually going to go down there and see it all, especially with more time for each video to be a bit more dedicated to it. It's really nice. It's truly one of the best parts of it. But there are important links down there in the comments as well for memberships, patrons, and the Discord. But thank you to everyone, not just direct supporters, but just you for giving your time here. Like, we are not infinite, we are finite, and you spent some of that time with me. That's amazing. Thank you so much for that. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon.